This is Chapter 7 of The Secret of Chimneys. Chapter 7. Mr. McGrath refuses an invitation. The letters were gone. Having once made up his mind the fact of their disappearance, there was nothing but to accept it. Anthony realized very well that he could not pursue Giuseppe through the corridors of the Blitz Hotel. To do so was to court undesired publicity, and in all probability to fail in his object all the same. He came to the conclusion that Giuseppe had mistaken the packet of letters enclosed as they were in other wrappings for the memoirs themselves. It was likely, therefore, that when he discovered his mistake he would make another attempt to get hold of the memoirs. For this attempt Anthony intended to be fully prepared. Another plan that occurred to him was to advertise discreetly for the return of the package of letters, supposing Giuseppe to be an emissary of the comrades of the Red Hand, or, which seemed to Anthony more probable, to be employed by the Loyalist party. The letters could have no possible interest for either employer, and he would probably jump at the chance of obtaining a small sum of money for their return. Having thought out all this, Anthony returned to bed and slept peacefully until morning. He did not fancy that Giuseppe would be anxious for a second encounter that night. Anthony got up with his plan of campaign fully thought out. He had a good breakfast, glanced at the papers, which were full of the new discoveries of oil in Herzlovia, and then demanded an interview with the manager, and, being Anthony Cade, with a gift for getting his own way, by means of quiet determination, he obtained what he asked for. The manager, a Frenchman, with an inquisitively suave manner, received him in his private office. You wished to see me, I understand, Mr. McGrath. I did. I arrived at your hotel yesterday afternoon and had dinner served to me in my own room by a waiter whose name was Giuseppe. He paused. I dare say we have a waiter of that name, agreed the manager indifferently. I was struck by something unusual in this waiter's manner, but thought nothing more of it at the time. Later in the night I was awakened by the sound of someone moving softly about the room. I switched on the light and found this same Giuseppe in the act of rifling through my leather suitcase. The manager's indifference had completely disappeared now. But I have heard nothing of this, he exclaimed. Why was I not informed sooner? The man and I had a brief struggle. He was armed with a knife, by the way. In the end, he succeeded in making off by way of the window. What did you do then, Mr. McGrath? I examined the contents of my suitcase. Had anything been taken? Nothing of importance, said Anthony slowly. The manager leaned back with a sigh. I'm glad of that, he remarked. But you will allow me to say, Mr. McGrath, that I do not quite understand your attitude at the matter. You made no attempt to arouse the hotel to pursue the thief? Anthony shrugged his shoulders. Nothing of value had been taken, as I tell you. I am aware of course, that strictly speaking, it is a case for the police. He paused, and the manager murmured, without any particular enthusiasm, For the police? Of course. In any case, I was fairly certain that the man would manage to make good his escape, and since nothing was taken, why bother with the police? The manager smiled a little. I see that you realize, Mr. McGrath, that I am not at all anxious to have the police called in. From my point of view, it is always disastrous if the newspapers can get hold of anything connected with a big, fashionable hotel such as this. They always run it for all it's worth, no matter how insignificant the real subject matter may be. Quite so, agreed Anthony. Now, I told you that nothing of value had been taken, and that was perfectly true in a sense. Nothing of any value to the thief was taken. But he got hold of something which is of considerable value to me. Ah, letters, you understand. An expression of superhuman desertion, only to be achieved by a Frenchman, settled down upon the manager's face. I comprehend, he murmured, but but perfectly, naturally, is not a matter for the police. We are quite agreed upon that point, but you will understand that I have every intention of recovering these letters. In the part of the world where I come from, people are used to doing things for themselves. What I require from you, therefore, is the fullest possible information you can give me about this waiter, Giuseppe. I see no objection to that, the manager, after a moment or two pause. I can't give you the information offhand, of course, but if you will return in half an hour's time, I will have everything ready to lay before you. Thank you very much. That will suit me admirably. In half an hour's time, Anthony returned to the office again to find that the manager had been as good as his word. Jotted down upon a piece of paper were all the relevant facts known about Giuseppe Manelli. He came to us, you see, about 3 months ago. A skilled and experienced waiter he has given complete satisfaction. He has been in England for 5 years. Together the two men ran over a list of the hotels and restaurants where the Italian had worked. One fact struck Anthony as being possibly of significance. At two of the hotels in question, there had been serious robberies during the time that Giuseppe was employed there, though no suspicion of any kind had attached to him in either case. Still, the fact was significant. Was Giuseppe merely a clever hotel thief? Had his search of Anthony's suitcase been merely part of his habitual professional tactics? He might just possibly had the packet of letters in his hand at the moment when Anthony switched on the light and have shoved it into his pocket mechanically so as to have his hands free. In that case, the thing was mere plain or garden robbery. Against that, there was to be put the man's excitement of the evening before, when he had caught sight of the papers lying on the table. There had been no money or object of value there, such as would excite the cupidity of an ordinary thief. No, Anthony felt convinced that Giuseppe had been acting as a tool for some outside agency. With the information supplied to him by the manager, it might be possible to learn something about Giuseppe's private life, and so finally track him down. He gathered up the sheet of paper and rose. Thank you very much indeed. It's quite unnecessary to ask, I suppose, whether Giuseppe is still in the hotel. The manager smiled. His bed was not slept in, and all his things have been left behind. He must have rushed straight out after his attack upon you. I don't think there is much chance of our seeing him again. I imagine not. Well, thank you very much indeed. I shall be staying on here for the present. I hope you will be successful in your task, but I confess that I am rather doubtful. I always hope for the best. One of Anthony's first proceedings was to question some of the other waiters who had been friendly with Giuseppe, but he obtained very little to go upon. He wrote out an advertisement on the lines he had planned and had it sent to 5 of the most widely read newspapers. He was just about to go out and visit the restaurant at which Giuseppe had been previously employed when the telephone rang. Anthony took up the receiver. Hello? What is it? A toneless voice replied. Am I speaking to Mr. McGrath? You are. Who are you? This is Messrs. Balderson and Hopkins. Just a minute, please. I will put you through to Mr. Balderson. Our worthy publishers, thought Anthony. So they are getting worried, too, are they? They needn't. There's a week to run still. A hearty voice struck suddenly upon his ear. Hello? That Mr. McGrath? Speaking. I'm Mr. Balderson of Balderson and Hopkins. What about that manuscript, Mr. McGrath? Well, said Anthony, what about it? Everything about it, I understand, Mr. McGrath, that you have just arrived in this country from South Africa. That being so, you can't possibly understand the position. There's going to be trouble about that manuscript. Mr. McGrath, big trouble. Sometimes I wish we'd never said we'd handle it. Indeed. I assure you it's so. At present, I'm anxious to get it into my possession as quickly as possible, so as to have a couple of copies made. Then, if the original is destroyed, well, no harm will be done. Dear me, said Anthony. Yes, I expect it sounds absurd to you, Mr. McGrath, but I assure you, you don't appreciate the situation. There's a determined effort being made to prevent its ever reaching this office. I say to you quite frankly and without humbug that if you attempt to bring it yourself, it's 10 to 1 that you'll never get here. I doubt that, said Anthony. When I want to get anywhere, I usually do. You're up against a very dangerous lot of people. I wouldn't have believed it myself a month ago. I tell you, Mr. McGrath, we've been bribed and threatened and cajoled by one lot and another until we don't know whether we're on our heads or our heels. My suggestion is that you do not attempt to bring the manuscript here. One of our people will call upon you at the hotel and take possession of it. And supposing the gang does him in? Asked Anthony. The responsibility would then be ours, not yours. You would have delivered it to our representative and obtained a written discharge. The cash for or £1,000, which we are instructed to hand to you, will not be available until Wednesday next, by the terms of our agreement with the executors of the late Arthur. You know whom I mean, but if you insist, I will send my own cash for that amount by the messenger. Anthony reflected for a minute or two. He had intended to keep the memoirs until the last day of grace, because he was anxious to see for himself what all the fuss was about. Nevertheless, he realized the force of the publisher's arguments. All right, he said with a little sigh, have it your own way. Send your man along, and if you don't mind sending that cash as well, I'd rather have it now, as I may be going out of England before next Wednesday. Certainly, Mr. McGrath. Our representative will call upon you first thing tomorrow morning. It will be wiser not to send anyone direct from the office. Our Mr. Holmes lives in South London. He will call in on us on his way to us, and will give you a receipt for the package. I suggest that tonight you should place a dummy packet in the manager's safe. Your enemies will get to hear of this and will prevent any attack being made upon your apartments tonight. Very well, I will do it as you direct. Anthony hung up the receiver with a thoughtful face. Then he went on with his interrupted plan of seeking news of the slippery Giuseppe. He drew a complete blank, however. Giuseppe had worked at the restaurant in question, but nobody seemed to know anything of his private life or associates. But I'll get you, my lad, murmured Anthony between his teeth. I'll get you yet. It's only a matter of time. His second night in London was entirely peaceful. At 9 o'clock the following morning, the card of Mr. Holmes from Messrs. Baldert and Hopkins was sent up, and Mr. Holmes followed it. A small, fair man with a quiet manner. Anthony handed over the manuscript and received in exchange a cash for £1,000. Mr. Holmes packed up the manuscript with the small brown bag he carried, wished Anthony good morning, and departed. The whole thing seemed very tame. But perhaps he'd be murdered on the way there, Anthony murmured aloud as he stared idly out of the window. I wonder now. I very much wonder. He put the cash in an envelope, enclosed a few lines of writing with it, and sealed it up carefully. Jimmy, who had been more or less in funds at the time of his encounter with Anthony at Bulawayo, had advanced him a sustainable sum of money, which was, as yet, practically untouched. If one's job done with, the other isn't, said Anthony to himself. Up to now, I've bungled it, but never say die. I think that, suitably disguised, I shall go and have a look at 487 Pont Street. He packed his belongings, went down and paid his bill, and ordered his luggage to be put on a taxi, suitably rewarding those who stood in his path, most of whom had done nothing whatsoever materially to add to his comfort. He was on the point of being driven off when a small boy rushed down the steps with a letter. "Just came for you this very minute, sir." With a sigh, Anthony produced yet another shilling. The taxi groaned heavily and jumped forward with a hideous crashing of gears, and Anthony opened the letter. It was rather a curious document. He had to read it 4 times before he could be sure of what it was all about. Put in plain English, the letter was not in plain English, but in a peculiar, evolved style common in missives issued in government officials. It presumed that Mr. McGrath was arriving in England from South Africa today, Thursday. It referred obliquely to the memoir of Count Stylepitch, and begged Mr. McGrath to do nothing in the matter until he had had a confidential conversation with Mr. George Lomax and certain other parties whose magnificence was vaguely hinted at. It also contained a definite invitation to go down to Chimneys as the guest of Lord Caterham on the following day, Friday. A mysterious and thoroughly obscure communication. Anthony enjoyed it very much. "Dear old England," he murmured affectionately, 2 days behind the times, as usual. Rather a pity. Still, I can't go down to Chimneys under false precincts. I wonder, though, if there's an inn handy. Mr. Anthony Cade might stay at the inn without anyone being the wiser. He leaned out of the window and gave new directions to the taxi driver, who acknowledged them with a snort of contempt. The taxi drew up before one of London's more obscure hostelries. The fare, however, was paid on a scale befitting its point of departure. Having booked a room in the name of Anthony Cade, Anthony passed into a dingy writing-room, took out a sheet of notepaper stamped with the legal hotel blitz, and wrote rapidly. He explained that he had arrived on the preceding Tuesday, that he had handed over the manuscript in question to Messrs. Balderson and Hopkins, and he regretfully declined the kind invitation to Lord Caterham, as he was leaving England almost immediately. He signed the letter, "Yours faithfully, James McGrath." "And now," said Anthony, as he affixed the stamp to the envelope, "to business. Exit James McGrath and enter Anthony Cade."